Welcome, everybody, to the Magic of Migration at Corkscrew Swamp Sanctuary with Sanctuary Director Keith Lockinen. Keith has 25 years of experience as a biologist in Southwest Florida. In fact, he is a Southwest Florida native. He grew up visiting Corkscrew Swamp Sanctuary as a kid, and he has been a member for 10 years, and he is an avid birder. Migration is his favorite time of year, as you will hear, and he's going to tell you a lot of stories about birds that are migrating and what we are doing to help and how you can get involved. Thank you so much for joining us. Now I'm going to turn it over to Keith.
Okay, perfect. First of all, thank you everybody for joining us on a Tuesday evening. This is my favorite topic, talking about birds. So if I sound enthusiastic, it's because I am. So when I was graduating the University of Florida, I swore I'd never become a birder because birders seem really obsessive and nerdy and they're a little bit crazy. We are. And it's okay because it's a lot of fun. So if you've never been birding, for a modern analogy, think of Pokemon Go. This is real life Pokemon Go where you can out there and you can try to find a bird and you can see it. But today I want to talk about migration, talk about overview of migration. What are birds telling us? How Audubon protects birds, and then we're going to have time for questions at the end. So first of all, Audubon, Florida. We are the state's most influential conservation nonprofit. We're really big. We have 2 state offices. There's 45 chapters, and we have 90 Audubon staffers in the state of Florida. We work with 45 local chapters that have 93,000 members here just in the state of Florida, with over 2,000 volunteers. So it's really citizens who are really taking lead and taking charge of these places. It's fantastic. Nationally, Audubon is very influential as well. 415 active Audubon chapters all around the country. We have 800 staff, and we have 350,000 members around the nation, which is pretty substantial. But all these stats up here, I think the most interesting one, 11 countries. We truly work hemispherically across the Americas. So 2 years ago, Audubon unveiled its new strategic plan. It's called Flight Plan. And this is a guiding star to guide us so we can do better at doing conservation and protecting birds. Because when we protect what birds need, we sustain ourselves too. We're working towards a future where birds across the Western Hemisphere are thriving because a diverse and growing Audubon community is a very powerful force for conservation.
Hey, Keith, can you lean closer to the microphone? Some people are having a harder time hearing you. Thank you.
Is it better?
A little bit, yeah.
Okay. So Audubon's mission is to protect birds in the places they need today, tomorrow, and in the future. And where you are in Florida, you look up at the sky, you're bound to see some birds. Some are high, some are low, some are flying a day, and some are taking phenomenal journeys across continents. Over the past 60 million years, thousands of bird species have dominated the air. And bird species have evolved over the millennia to rely on specific locations for seasonal needs. During the year, different habitats become available, and many birds are adapted to breed each spring in locations where food is most plentiful for the growing families. This is especially important with long-distance migrants. This is a black-polled warbler. We'll talk a little bit more about this bird a little bit later in the presentation. So people think about migration as just birds coming and going, but really they're following what we call the greening of North America. At this slide, you can see on the left, it's a little bit complicated, but basically it's the date of the last freeze. You can see South Florida before January 16th. It didn't freeze this year at all. But as you go north, obviously, that freeze date gets later and later. As that freeze date gets later and later, you have trees, plants, which are starting to grow flowers, starting to grow leaves. And with that, you get all these insects which are coming out. And so the birds are following that natural breeding to North America. So by the time they get to the breeding area, all those plants are popping, all the bugs are growing so they can feed their families. Where birds travel and why have been questions in our mind for centuries, but only recently have the answers become so important. Because of human activities around the globe continue to reduce, alter, or render habitats useless. However, technology has put some answers within our reach, and the results are guiding land management practices for the better, for birds, people, and the planet. So I just love this slide because, birds really connect us out just through the Americas. More than half of the birds in America fly to Central and South America to spend the winter. including hundreds of species, such as orioles, hummingbirds, ducks, shorebirds, hawks, and many more. But exactly what route they take, how long they remained, and if they return to those same breeding grounds was a mystery until recently. So this is a fantastic tool for those who are interested in migration and wanting to know a little bit more about that bird that's in the backyard. This is the Audubon Bird Migration Explorer. And you can go onto this website, explorer.audubon.org, after this presentation. And it's just a fantastic resource where you can see where these different flyways are for different species. You can tell what time these birds are coming in and how they're timing their migration. A lot of these birds are migrating. They migrate a little bit differently with each species. They migrate a little bit to a different place. And so they have different places in the Americas. They're coming through in different timings, these different waves of migration. And so this tool is really fantastic. And in this tool, we not only have the winter and summer ranges of these species, but now there's 11,500 bird tracks for almost 200 species. And Audubon is very collaborative. So we work with the Bird Genoscape Project, MODIS tracking system, which we'll talk more about, the United States Geological Survey Band Lab, MoveBank, and of course the modeling information from eBird at the Cornell Lab. So in 2014, Birds Canada established the MODIS Wildlife Tracking System. In Latin, MODIS means movement. And this system measures movement of birds with powerful antennas to record birds outfitted with nanotags. If a tagged animal goes anywhere within 12 miles of one of these towers, it records that information, submits it to the internet on a database that anybody can look at. This MODIS program really helps us better understand and confirm the locations of migrating birds where they need survival, facilitating the prioritization of those locations for conservation. And this is the one we actually have in the backcountry of Corkscrew Swamp Sanctuary. This one was implemented in 2022, and this is a growing network around the world, and especially North America and South America. So all these different locations are working together to receive the information from these birds as they're migrating through. So you can get a pretty good real-time idea of where these birds are coming, when they're leaving, how long they're staying, and what areas they're sort of queuing on. So that way we know the exact date and time that these tagged birds came within the vicinity of one of these antennas. And technology's really changed the game. Historically, we would look at bird bands and try to get an idea there. There were some other early attempts at transmitting and putting trackers on birds, but these nanotags have really changed the game. These things are very, very light, very, very tiny. They affect the bird, and they're very effective to understanding exactly where these birds are coming and going. So this MODIS tracking, it aids us in understanding the timing and seasonal duration of migration. Some birds will migrate over a very short amount of time. Some will migrate much longer. Now, for example, in the spring, those birds are following the greening like I discussed, so they're migrating through much quicker. In the fall, they sort of take time. They can take their time, they're done breeding, so they can move a little bit slower. It fills in our knowledge gaps across the broader science community. It informs science land managers about birds' seasonal habitat preferences. And so we have a couple of slides that we'll talk about here, but this is really important because birds, when they're migrating, they're using different habitats at different times. It also allows land managers to understand the importance of these habitats. Now, here are some of those birds. Okay, I'm going with one of my favorite birds to start out with. This is a gray catbird. And right now, if you want to see a gray catbird, you need to come to Corkscrew Swamp Sanctuary. These birds winter here, but they also migrate. We've got our first batch of these migrating birds that come in. They've got a lot of personality, a lot of swag. You can hear them, emitting cries, but they're very visible right now. And that slate gray is just, I think, absolutely a really gorgeous bird. And so I'm going to talk about these different maps. Hopefully you all can see my cursor here. And there's going to be a couple things going on, so I'll just kind of break it down for you. This is going to be the breeding habitat. Anything that you see in green is going to be the breeding or summer habitat for these species. The blue is going to be the wintering habitat of these species. So just looking at this map, and there's sort of integrated areas where there be different ones. Now, we do have some individually tagged birds, which you'll see moving through these. And so these are birds which are tagged on nanotags, or there might be other research projects where we have really high resolution of these birds moving. And so as we start here, this is the summer, so we'll hit play. And you can see our catbirds are all up north. And then all of a sudden, October, boom, they all flow down to the south. And this is interesting in here because it appears there's some kind of high resolution research study taking place in Texas and Mexico. So they have a pretty good idea where those birds are going. And then the summer, they head back up to the north. I was actually talking to my friend Bruce the other day, and he's a snowbird. And he's going back to Connecticut very shortly. And, I was pointing out all the catbirds. And I said, Bruce, you're lucky. You get to see catbirds all year round. As soon as they leave here and you leave here, you're going to Connecticut and you have these guys in your backyards. So I think it's really fascinating how my winter backyard bird is Bruce's summer backyard bird. This is an ovenbird. This is a very cool little warbler. These things walk like chickens, and they're always on the understory of the forest. They don't get very high at all. They're always in the leaf litter. They're always picking up little insects, and they're very busy little birds. So some birds have pretty clear migration patterns. All of them kind of go and flow at the same time. Others don't. And so this is one I'll show you, but it's important to know with ovenbirds, this range to the north. So they're very picky about their breeding. They need large, mature forests from the mid-Atlantic states to northeast Colombia. They need uninterrupted forests with close canopy between 50 and 70 feet above the ground. And even forest patches that are less than 2,000 acres may not be big enough to support ovenbirds, these little tiny birds. So they really need big spaces. Now in the wintertime, they're much less specific, and you can see these things anywhere. Matter of fact, we see them around our buildings all the time here at Corkscrew in the wintertime. So let's see what our ovenbirds are going to do. So we see this big flow down in October, and then you can see ovenbirds don't always play by the rules. They're popping back up forth, all through winter, and then all of a sudden they'll head back up to the north, and they're going to stay there until breeding is done, and then they're going to come back down. So right now, Corkscrew is a really good place to see ovenbirds from the boardwalk, especially in the very swampy areas, because that's what the species really prefers, really moist, damp areas. So this is a really fun bird to see right now. And they've got this little red crest that sometimes they'll pop it up. This beauty is a Prothonotary warbler. It's just absolutely gorgeous. These birds just started coming through Corkscrew and South Florida probably about a week or two ago. These are one of our earlier migrant species, and these warblers are absolutely magnificent. This is a species that really blows through here. Now, this species breeds in bottomland, flooded forest, wooded swamps, and forests near lakes and streams. And they don't, also like ovenbirds, they're picky. They don't like forest patches smaller than 250 acres. And what's really neat is in Bidler Swamp, which is an Audubon Sanctuary in South Carolina, they have over 2,000 of these birds nesting every single year. They've actually been studying them in that forest since 2016, trying to have an idea where they're going. So you can see this is a bird during the winter. They really stay in Venezuela, that northwest coast of South America, and then they flow very fast. They come through this area pretty quick. There's always a couple late stragglers. They're up there, they're out. So these birds migrate through very quickly through these areas. So you basically have a couple weeks to see Prothonotary warbler in the spring. In fall, you might have a little bit more because they're more relaxed. They've already done the breeding. Now, this is a bird I mentioned earlier. This is a blackpoll warbler. This is not a black and white warbler. A lot of people get them confused. One of the keys on this is you can see that the stripes don't go all the way down. It has a yellowish bill and yellowish legs. And also, they don't climb upside down on branches like black and white warblers do. So this species is really wild. And again, just understanding the habitat that they need to breed and where they winter is important. So this is a bird that does not winter in South America, in South Florida. They breed in black spruce, tamarack forest, in Canada's boreal forest. They use thickets of spruce and alder, northern New England, wet areas, and they winter in the Andes. And so when you look at their migration, you're going to see all these birds, and then they very quickly flow through Florida. So most of these birds are coming through Florida, and these birds are one of the later migrants. They're not going to come through for probably a couple, 3 weeks, and then all of a sudden they come through here. Now, the interesting thing about blackpoll warblers, and it doesn't really show up on here, is actually a lot of them will actually migrate over the Western Atlantic, off the U.S. coast, way out here for a long distance. We know that from records. That doesn't show up on this. You can see the little bit of coloration here because there's no MODIS towers out in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. So for a bird species that's doing this migration in September and October, you can imagine what could be a big threat for them: hurricanes. And so that's a species that, you know, if there's a big hurricane in the area, that is going to be impacted, because once they get in, they may not be able to get out. And these beauties, they came back about a week late this year. It was interesting. I was texting with a lot of my birder friends, and nobody had seen them yet. So they showed up about a week late. I call them Valentine's Day birds because that's typically when they're here, but they're absolutely everywhere right now. They are masters of the sky. If you've never seen these things in action, they can fly all day seemingly without flapping their wings once. They're really effective predators, and they will even eat on the wing. Now, if you notice, there's going to be a location of one yellow dot of a tagged bird. And so these things breed in swamps, lowland forests, and marshes of the Southeast United States, especially in Florida and South Carolina. They require tall trees for nesting in open areas full of small prey. They have a lot of lizards. They have a lot of other species. Turn my camera back on. Other species such as dragonflies. And so they're always eating on the wing. And they need these habitats, which include slash pine wetlands, edges of pine forests, cypress swamps, just like here at Corkscrew Swamp Sanctuary. And you can see we've got this one little dot down here, and this is going to be our migrant bird. And you see where it jumped across. It jumped across from Yucatan, South Florida. Most of the swallow kites that end up in the U.S., I would gather the largest portion come up somewhere through Southwest Florida, probably from Cape Sable to Lee County. Collier County seems to be a really hot spot when these birds are coming in. We can see an absolutely lot of them. They are really just fantastic birds. And every once in a while, we get the opportunity to have an aggregation of these birds. This is before they start to stage up before they migrate in the fall. They form these huge aggregations. And this picture was actually taken in the backcountry of Corkscrew Swamp Sanctuary. There's over 300 birds in here. And when you look up and you see swallowtail kites as far as I can see, you know something's going well. It's an absolutely phenomenal day. Swallowtail kites absolutely everywhere. And so they'll sit up in roost areas for a few days before they take off and they migrate down to South America. But unfortunately, there's some bad news. Wild bird populations have declined by 3 billion birds in my lifetime. And this is for a variety of reasons. Habitat loss is really the main one. You cannot underscore how much habitat has been lost for these species. And like I said, with some of the key birds, even if you don't destroy the whole habitat, even just reducing the size of it can have a real big impact on if they can breed or not. Pesticide use, that is a real problem. You know, when people put out poison for rats, you know, that's a serious problem for raptors. Collisions with buildings, you know, that's what we'll talk about in a bit. Plastics in the marine environment and invasive species. House cats, feral cats have a massive impact on birds. If you have a cat, please keep it inside. Consider the impact that these cats are having on all these birds we saw. So what are we doing? We want to bend the birth curve at Audubon. We're really invested in working with all our partners to bend that bird curve. So, but the way we do this, we track some of our birds here at the sanctuary. So this is a purple martin. It's a type of swallow, and they nest now exclusively in human-made nest boxes. It's probably the only species that's done that. They used to nest in cavities, but over time, people have built so many nest boxes, and you actually see these gourds that they nest in, and that's primarily where they nest. So humans are the key to this species' continued survival, and thankfully, people love purple martins. They're really cool. They form these big flights, and they're chirping all over the place. They're just really fantastic, beautiful birds. And in 2022, the very first birds recorded at our MODIS station were long-distance migrants from the Amazon basin. In September, we actually pinged one of these birds, came from Costa Rica, came right up through Corkscrew Swamp Sanctuary. up through northern Florida and ended up in its summer range up around Washington, D.C. This is an American redstart, and Georgetown University tagged this bird at Font Hill in Jamaica. And you can see the jewelry it's got. That's the bling that some of our warblers have. So if you actually see one of these birds and you can take a picture and report the color, you can actually go to bandedbirds.org and report this. So, you know, there's a lot of technology with nanotags, but there are old school ways of tagging these birds so we can figure out where they're going. So this bird was banded in Jamaica, and it left Jamaica immediately and pinged at one of our neighboring stations, Florida Panther National Wildlife Refuge, and then it pinged here. 9 days later, it was in Odessa Wildlife Station in Iowa. And so many of these birds really need that Midwestern U.S. For their winter, for their summer breeding. So really important that we have those. This is a red knot. This is a small shorebird. This is a medium-sized shorebird. It's actually a large sandpiper. And you're probably asking, why are you talking about a coastal species when you're talking about migration at Corkscrew? So on August 6th, we actually got our first reported migrating red knot. And it was coming across the state. And I think it's really important to remember that these birds are long distance migrants. They breed in the Canadian Arctic. They stop at U.S. locations to fuel up on food on the East Coast, and especially horseshoe crabs. And if you really want to learn about migration and how these birds are, I highly suggest this book. This is a book called Moonbird. This is B95. This is the bird that was tagged in South America, I believe in 1992. And it grew to be 22 years old that we know of. And its annual migration is 18,000 miles. So they start all the way down here, all the way up through North America, and they breed up in these areas. And this is actually a subspecies called roofer red knots. And they're having a really hard time right now for a lot of reasons. One of those reasons that is they're having a hard time with, but also huge opportunities, these guys, these are horseshoe crabs. And in the spring and early summer, these guys make these huge mating congregations on the east coast of the U.S., from South Carolina all the way up to the Mid-Atlantic. And those eggs are very nutritious. So this is a little bit confusing. So I think it'll walk you through it. So these are 3 individual red knots. All of them came in right over South Carolina. And you can see they were at these locations for 12 days, and they were feasting on these crabs because they have just flown a long way from South America and probably lost a significant amount of their body weight because they were on the wing for a long time. And you can see they also moved up the coast for a few days up here to fuel up, and then a few more days to fuel up from there. One more stop to fuel up. They all stopped in here. So this must be also important horseshoe crab or some other species. And from there, they went off to breed. And then they came right back down. So this red knot, these species are depending, imagine if you're on the coast of South Carolina and, commercial fishermen are really having a big impact on horseshoe crabs. They're going to have a very direct impact on species such as red knots by removing those out of the ecosystem. And so most of these red knots are really under threat from sea level rise and losing those critical habitats. And who would have thought that protecting horseshoe crabs actually protects red knots and other species? This is a bird called a lesser yellowlegs because it has yellow legs. And there's 2 species of yellowlegs. The other one's greater. So this is a small bird that is pretty cosmopolitan across the Americas. And they kind of flow from all over South America to, a lot of places in North America. You can see that they're, if you're in anywhere east of the Rockies, you're going to have a good chance of seeing these at some wetland at some point. They do winter in South Florida. They also winter in Texas. And you can see there's parts here in California, probably Mexico. So these species are pretty adaptable, and they will be in a lot of different locations. So, we thought we knew quite a bit about these birds. And then, discovery is always something really cool. So this is a lesser yellowlegs. This is a very special bird. This bird was tagged with a nanotag April 27th by Jorge Velazquez, and he's working with the Audubon Americas team in Colombia. A MODA station in Colombia picked it up about May 6th. And then same bird was picked up at Moda Station in Missouri 10 days later. It flew that huge distance. And then it sort of disappeared off the radar. And then it made its way back down and pinged right off our Corkscrew Tower. And you can see this bird being released here. Wow. And what's really neat about this is that Audubon, doing that conservation work across the Americas, we're able to reach out to this research and said, hey, we found your bird. And so now that we know that Corkscrew Swamp Sanctuary is important for these birds moving through in the summer and fall. And South Florida is really important for location for birds during migration. And we got to see this really firsthand. In 2024, Hurricane Milton, one of the many hurricanes from last year, I had to look up which hurricane it was because it felt like it was all of them. It made landfall to the northwest of the sanctuary. And what it did is probably force some birds, to how they changed their movement. But what we found is both last year during Hurricane Milton and through all the other locations, all the other years, is that Swinton's thrush and gray cheek thrush, which are some of these birds up here, these are thrushes, they're really neat. They all flow to Florida to migrate. And so we know these are really important habitats. And if you go to the coast in the spring, or if you come out to Corkscrew Swamp in the spring, you can see the birds all over. So they may only be here for a very short time, but it's very important to protect those habitats. There's trees like strangler figs. They have fruits which these birds really rely on. So we want to make sure that we're not actually taking those trees out and we're not impacting how these birds migrate. So how does Audubon protect migrating birds in the places that eat in Florida? So we have a program in Florida. This is several local Audubon chapters. You can't underscore the power of these local chapters and citizens doing their work. The Appalachia Audubon Society, Duval County Audubon Society, they have a Lights Out Northeast Florida, West Volusia County, Stetson chapter, Tropical Audubon, Lights Out Miami, and Audubon of Southwest Florida have all made a big impact in this. And we also have over 780 volunteers statewide who've monitored 1,460 eagle nests. And it's just amazing that citizens are able to tell us how these birds are doing. And the state of Florida, bald eagles are doing very well. Almost 1,500 nests statewide. Also, one of our centers in Orlando, the Center for Birds of Prey, actually admitted over 650 raptors last year. And this includes species like American kestrel, peregrine falcon, snellkite, crested caracara, bald eagle, and more. And in a couple of years, actually more than 50 rehabilitated bald eagles were released as far as other species. CBOP, the Center for Birds of Prey, also contributed data to research on rodent poisoning, blood parasites, and other species. Coastal bird conservation is also really important. Our coastal team is really active on protecting these birds on beaches, islands, roof nesting tops, all the state of Florida. You can see this adorable little least tern, which is one of my favorite birds here. Also species like black skimmers, other terns, American oyster catchers. And we've had over 300 beach sites, islands, and rooftops. And that's really interesting because rooftops are becoming more important for some of these species, such as least terns, because they've really lost a lot of habitat on the coast due to sea level rise and storm surge. And 400 volunteers, which we could not do without this program. In the Florida Keys, at the Everglades Science Center, staff at Audubon has been monitoring roseate spoonbills in Florida Bay since the 1930s, so coming up on almost 100 years. Now they're collecting that data with camera traps and cellular tracking devices. The staff down there is also very, very involved in Everglades restoration. They're collecting data on food web parameters from 20 stations in Florida Bay, and they're monitoring the effective nesting effort, success of roseate spoonbills. Also, tricolored herons, reddish egrets are all through Florida Bay. And then one of the most interesting things right now that you probably heard about a couple of years ago is American flamingos. And so our staff are out there seeing those. And so in 2023, we had a really interesting hurricane year. This was Hurricane Idalia. And you notice it's kind of bouncing there between the Yucatan and Cuba. And that's important because there's a lot of flamingos which are in those areas. So Hurricane Idalia picked up those flamingos and basically flung them all over the United States of America. They ended up all the way from Kansas, Texas. There were even birds on Cape Cod. There was 100 flamingos all across Florida and the US. And what's really neat, in February of last year, we had a statewide survey of, we were asking people to submit their flamingo sightings for February. And it was over 100 flamingos still in the state of Florida. So hopefully some of these birds are going to stick around. In November of last year, Dr. Mark Cook with the South Florida Water Management District actually found this flock of 62 birds in Florida Bay. So the hope is that maybe they'll hang around, maybe they'll start to breed again. So protecting and restoring this habitat in Florida could really increase the resilience of the species as a whole. And we're continuing to work with organizations, international partners such as the Florida Flamingo Working Group, and a larger effort of the Greater Flamingo Conservation Group. And we're monitoring these birds, and as nesting sites dwindle in other places, we might be on the verge of really having a renaissance of the species. There's been a lot of effort and money put into Everglades restoration, and wouldn't it be neat if at the end of this, we're able to restore habitat for these species and they start nesting again. We have coastal island sanctuaries in the Tampa Bay area, Pinellas County, south of Bradenton. And these coastal island sanctuaries, they've been installing these breakwaters, which are basically these big concrete devices which actually slow down water from eroding these areas. It also helps to serve as settlement, so you can have things like oysters and clams and barnacles on those, which are also very important in the ecosystem. And they're helping protect these essential rookery islands where you have wingbirds, reddish egrets, little blue herons, tricolored herons, American oyster catchers, spoonbills, wood storks, and species like brown pelicans. And the Coastal Island Sanctuary team is also conducting a banding study on brown pelicans, which unfortunately had been rescued from entanglement from fishing line at the Sunshine Skyway. So we're very busy in the Tampa Bay area. And of course, back to Corkscrew. So we are part of the Western Everglades. You can see that this whole Everglades area, and we've been sort of cut off by development in this area. So this entire watershed is, luckily, a lot of it's been protected. So Corkscrew Swamp Sanctuary is over 13,000 acres. And you may not know because when you come from the boardwalk, you only have 1% visible. So it's a really vast place, and it truly is a sanctuary. We confine the public usage to the boardwalk, to that 2.25 mile boardwalk, which is absolutely amazing. It's jumping out there right now with birds. And I did a search on eBird today, and over the years, eBird has had 6,700 birders submit over 25,000 checklists just from Corkscrew Swamp Sanctuary, and over 264 total species, which is absolutely remarkable. So this is a great place to come birding, and this is the time to come do it. Now through the first week in May, it's the best birding you can possibly get down here. But we are far more than a boardwalk. We protect and manage those 13,000 acres. And actually, we have burned, I think, about 5,000 acres since in the past 5 years. We've managed over 3,000 acres with invasive species. We've restored over 1,500 acres of getting those Carolina willows out, which are invasive, which will be a whole nother discussion, which I talked a lot about. But the whole point there is that we're moving the species and getting the balance back right so that we can have more wading birds utilizing these habitats. And very excitingly, so far, we have not yet had a Burmese python. We have been monitoring for Burmese pythons. We've had them, we know that they're in the area. We're hoping that they're going to take their time to get here, but we're trying our best to really be ready with a rapid response plan when they show up. And hopefully they never will. But we have a pretty good idea of where to look when they do come. So we're crossing our fingers, and we hope if anybody's seeing pythons in the area, please report it. Let the FWC know there's actually a website called I've Got One. That way we can have an idea where they might be. And then our latest thing that I just want to share with you, very exciting times here at Corkscrew Swamp Sanctuary. We're in the middle of our capital campaign where we're expanding our ability to do science, to do research, to do public engagement and education. And this is renderings of our capital campaign. This is going to be our new campus. That will be the John Jack Hayworth Western Everglades Research Center. That'll be a high-tech, fully functioning laboratory, which we can host scientists from all over the country and all over the world. Hopefully new dormitories as well as a new outdoor classroom. And this has been supported by donors. We're about 75% to our goal. So if you're interested, you can scan this QR code. You can also go to our website, learn more about it, corkscrew.audubon.org/vision. So it's a really exciting time. And doing this work is really expand the capacity for us to get kids excited, to get adults excited about protecting this place, protecting these birds so we can bend that bird curve. And also help our scientists be able to do the work where they can support bending that bird curve. What can you do to help? I mentioned you can go to audubon.org/bandedbirds. Submit your sightings to eBird. That's really important. We use a lot of information from there. Make sure you know what you're citing in there. There can be some mistakes. Always check your eBird list. Right now, there's a lot of things going on. So if you want to get information on what Audubon is doing on the policy front, you can subscribe to the Florida Audubon Advocate and support Lights Out in your community. This is really important. There was the Lights Out programs that Audubon is doing is very important. Unfortunately, there was a building in Texas several years ago that many birds got disoriented in lights, and I think something like 2,000 birds were actually killed in window strikes because of that. So even places like Corkscrew Swamp Sanctuary, a dark place without any lights, is really important for migrating birds. Come visit the sanctuary, and of course, you can support our capital campaign. So with that, that is all I have for all of you today.